put record. Darn. Oh, well. So we are recording now. By the way, you're welcome to join the program. We're on Monday through Friday, 12 noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. 617-396-4958. 617-396-4958. Charles Moscowitz here, live Monday through Friday, 12 noon to 1 p.m. My books are available at Amazon Books, and they include my latest short book, which is called We Are All Socialists Now, A Deplorable Looks at the 2020 Election, where I talk about the election fraud. Anyways, for everyone tuning in right now to my recorded version, and I just started that, the big news today, and besides the 17 executive orders that were signed into law by President Biden yesterday, and I'm going to get into that in a minute, is that the U.S. Senate apparently is going to try President Trump and try to convict him. That Mitch McConnell did meet with Schumer, and they did discuss this, and Schumer did lay out in no uncertain terms the goal, which was to make sure that President Trump never runs for office again. They're going for the head on the silver platter. I mean, this is almost the equivalent of the Tsar Nicholas solution. Not that bad, but certainly, politically speaking, the equivalent. And that, it's based upon this this phony accusation that Trump is somehow a terrorist and an insurrectionist. It's all lies. But they're going to do it. And I think that, they may pull it off. They've got, they have to have, the U.S. Senate needs a 2/3 majority to do this. And I don't doubt that all of the Democrats are going to do it, because why not? It's political. They feel they got nothing to lose. They serve 6-year terms. And they're so convinced, and probably rightfully, that the media hatred that has been stoked against Trump and all the lies that have been told about him for 4 years and all the viciousness will carry them through. I mean, it's actually, if they're afraid not to do it, because, the power of the establishment elite, the internationalists, the globalists, the top 1%ers, as Occupy Wall Street used to call them quite accurately, and all of their media lackeys, has been successful enough to make sure that they know that their power will be perpetrated if they do this, and that they have to do it to stop the opponents. As far as the Republicans go, we know that there are several traitors mixed in there. And we know that, for example, Mitt Romney and Susan Murkowski and Susan Collins of Maine, probably a few others, will probably sell Trump out. Why not? They don't have anything. They don't care politically. Maybe they think that they'll gain from it. They know that these are lies, but it's all a political calculation. And but they need 17 senators from the Republican side to actually convict. And I think that they are using extreme measures to get that to happen. I do think that they're going to go for it. And I think they very well may pull it off. There's going to be a vigorous and concerted final blast of hatred and lies to try to pull it off. And we're going to see it roll out. I think they're going to try to temper that to an extent, with the hope that it doesn't hinder or derail the Nazi agenda of the Biden administration and their implementation of their various orders, which I'm going to get into in a minute. So that's what they're balancing. But I think that in the bigger picture, they're determined to do it. And the way they're going to do it, as I mentioned before the recording here, gives me a chance to re-edit the fact that I forgot to press the record button. I mean, there's so many buttons I need to press here, and I'm not the best at button pressing, but there we go. it gives me a chance to re-edit a little bit. The way they're going to go about it is through terror and through tactics of intimidation and threat. And the people that are going to carry out those threats are the shock troops of the Democratic Party, just like Lenin had his shock troops, and Lenin coined the phrase shock troops, that emanated out of Cheka, his private army. The Democratic Party has their shock troops in the form of Antifa and BLM. They're getting huge funding from Democratic sources, much of which they funneled back directly into the Democratic Party. They've got international support from people like George Soros operating out of Canada. And they've got massive media support, which conveys them as heroic. We know last summer that they really got launched as they began to loot Black businesses, burn Black neighborhoods, and kill Black people across the country and other neighborhoods. They began an insurrectionist policy. They actually declared independence in Seattle, the so-called, Chop Chaz. I think they tried to do it in Portland. I think they did do it in Portland, Oregon. They even tried to do it, I think, briefly in New York. It didn't go that far. They're the ones that burned the St. John's Church across the street from the White House, and which is a church that every American president, starting with James Madison, had prayed in. They're the ones who tried to attack and breach the federal courthouse in Portland, Oregon, the Mark Hatfield courthouse, threw trash at it, graffiti everywhere, garbage. And they are the ones who really started what absolutely can be called an insurrection. They're the same people who I would suggest, and I think there is some evidence, and it's not entirely the case, who used the peaceful protest in Washington that is now being demonized of January 6th, which was basically to support Congress's investigating the question of voter fraud, which was supposed to happen in the joint session of Congress when the electors were counted. They wanted to show their support. Isn't that what America is supposed to be about? Peaceful assemblage, support for the right to free speech, the right to assemble, the right to a redress of grievances. That's the First Amendment. I think upwards of 1 million people came out to try to demand that the U.S. Congress hear the evidence of voter fraud. 7 states were contested in that election. This wasn't an attempt to overthrow the results of the election. This is an attempt to, what they contended was, stop the overthrow of the results of the election. This was the lost opportunity to hear the evidence one way or the other, to hear it aired publicly, to see it questioned publicly, so that it could be properly vetted in the public eye, with the media forced to pay attention, and with the American people finally getting to the bottom of it. The media had failed to do it up until that point because the media was completely in the bag of trying to take out the Trump administration. They decided, hook or crook, that they wanted Trump removed from office. The states that were targeted for this were run by corrupt governments that not only refused to do it, but had actually unconstitutionally enacted laws under the guise of the COVID-19 emergency that would have weakened the ability of voter ID unnecessarily, I would argue, and had done so by doing an end run around their state legislators, which Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution indicates are the only proper authority, the only lawful authority for making election laws. That's what the Supreme Court case was about. That's what several of the state court cases were about, pointing out that these votes were cast illegally because they were not sanctioned by the state legislatures. This was unprecedented. It had never happened before. And so all of those laws were weakened, and there was no hearing on that. There was no hearing on our independent judiciary on the state or federal level, including the Supreme Court level, in terms of having a venue by which this evidence could be presented. Maybe they'd find that there wasn't evidence. The point is, we don't know because it never reached the actual courtroom. And then finally, you had the Congress. Hello, thank you for joining me. Yes, you're on the air. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, hey, Charles, it's Paul. Thanks for taking my call.
All right, Paul, how are you?
Good. It reminds me of when Peter Schiff did his show. He had Anything Goes Friday. I love that. It's fantastic.
Oh, great. Well, yeah, but I have to be careful here, Paul, because I don't have the ability to screen the calls. And I don't know if you know, but I mean, last week I had somebody call up and they mumbled the N word. And as a result, I was suspended from TikTok. So I just, I don't know. I'm really, I want to do this. I want to proceed with it. But if people are going to try to sabotage the show by using such terms and by, what I would suggest anyone listening here, let's pretend this is a radio station and let's talk, let's stay within the bounds of what is acceptable language-wise. And let's avoid, racism or anything like that, which I don't allow anyway. But I can't control what someone might say. So, I want to continue with this. I'm under siege as it is. Everything I'm doing now is being examined. I've already been that's already been made clear to me, and I'm being shadow banned, which is why I'm expanding my reach. By every week, I'm getting more live streams. I'm getting more archives. So that way, if they take one down, I'll have the others, because I'm determined to do this every day from 12 to 1 p.m., Monday through Friday. Anyway, Paul, what's on your mind?
Well, I'm sorry that happened to you. And Charles, not to sound obsequious, but your guests and your record, I mean, your shows are fantastic. I want to compliment you on that.
Thank you.
I wasn't sure because I haven't been able to watch all the time. What was your opinion about Julian Assange not being pardoned? Were you upset by that?
Yes, I think he should be pardoned. He's an honest truth teller. He's a whistleblower. He's in the media, and I think he's been censored, and I think he's been attacked. I don't think he wasn't actually releasing the information. The information was handed to him by people. And I don't believe, I could be wrong here, but I don't believe that anything that Julian Assange released put anyone at risk. I mean, it wasn't like he was revealing, people, who are undercover and that they lost their lives. I mean, I don't believe he did that. So, if he did do that, then that's a crime, but I don't believe he did.
Did you think that Trump not doing it was political, or?
Maybe Trump knew something about it that we don't know. Maybe there's a reason why he didn't do it. I don't know. I mean, I wish he had, and that is disappointing. But of course, we don't know the inside story. I mean, I think there might have been reasons why. What do you think?
Well, I'm not sure if he had done it, maybe it was a way of the Democrats or someone in power. Maybe I know he's been suspected of committing crimes in New York. Maybe this was a way of him, doing it to protect himself. Because I remember even when Julian Assange was originally arrested, he said he had nothing to do with him, and yet we know when he campaigned, he used his name all the time during those 3 debates with Hillary. He mentioned WikiLeaks a few times, and I could argue that, and I think that really helped his ability to win. That WikiLeaks exposure, I think, did a huge monumental disservice for Hillary Clinton.
Oh, absolutely. I remember when Assange released a thatch of emails that were really, damaging to Hillary, at least her image. That was bad. And then, of course, you have the questions that are still lingering out there about what happened with Seth Rich. He was a Democratic Party media operative, and I think he was a data specialist who had access to their internet. He was shot dead in cold blood right in the back. He wasn't robbed. He was assassinated. And it was right after that Debbie Wasserman Schultz had to resign as the head of the DNC. and that Bernie Sanders was basically taken out. I think that had a lot to do because Seth Rich was a Bernie Sanders supporter. I think that had to do with the use of, I don't know, maybe some kind of voter manipulation, maybe some electronic manipulation. We don't know. But we do know that it was a very strange phenomena that Bernie Sanders lost those primaries. I remember that it was weird because I remember that I always, every 4 years, I like to go up to New Hampshire to watch the primary, the first primary. I live in Boston. And that year, Bernie Sanders won the popular vote in New Hampshire by a pretty large margin, but he got 0 delegates. All of it went to Hillary. It was just a rather odd thing. And that this continued to happen. I mean, obviously, the thing was rigged against him. My understanding is, according to Mark Levin, that some of the people working for Bernie Sanders actually went to him afterwards and said, we have evidence here that Hillary had rigged this election and that there was some manipulation of the Dominion voting machines or something like that. And they gave the whole dossier about it to him, and he decided to do nothing about it, which is terrible. So I mean, getting back to Julian Assange, there's a question of a connection between him and Seth Rich. Maybe Seth Rich is the one that dropped the hard drive of the DNC into his lap and the Hillary stuff. I don't know. Who knows?
Hey, Charles, you're one of the reasons I love your show and love you is you're so well read. I was wondering if I could just ask you one quick question that has
Sure.
nothing to do with what we just talked about. I gave my nephew The Radicalization of the American Constitution by Gordon Wood, which won the Pulitzer Prize in '93. And I'm not sure if you're a fan of Gordon Wood.
I'll look into it. I'm not. I don't know much about him. I'll look into it.
But in that book, it's during the time of the founding of the convention, and I was telling this to my nephew, and he might do something on it. But did you know that during the Constitution, about 2/3 of the time, Madison had an article that he wanted, which said that any state law that the federal government didn't like, they could veto. And of course, it was thrown out, but it was in there for about 2/3 of the Constitution. Do you think just the mentality of Madison writing something like that had a lot? It really kind of explains what the idea of what these people were thinking, that they would want to veto any state law. I mean, does that, A, did you know that, and B, what do you think about the mentality that they had of that concept?
Well, I mean, I didn't know that. I mean, I cannot really put myself, as the play Hamilton says, in the room where it happened, in terms of what that was about, why they were debating that. I mean, I generally think that there was probably a reason why Madison wanted to do that. It might have had to do with maybe states becoming like, little dictatorships. I don't know. I mean, maybe a state was going to declare something, who knows? I mean, I think there probably is a reasonable explanation, because I think Madison was a good libertarian generally. I mean, he wanted a strong central government, but at the same time, he was opposed to Madison's bank. He wanted to have good faith and credit script created by the U.S. Treasury, as opposed to private banking. And generally speaking, he was on the right side on most of those issues. So there might have been something going on there that motivated that. There might have been some states that wanted to do something that would have been so at variance with, the constitutional principles and with civil libertarian principles, that maybe he felt that those things should be overridden. And in fact, they can be overridden if they violate certain federal dictates. Like if you have a state decide to ban all private ownership of firearms, right? You have you have in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights says that they can't do that. So I think that that's what might have been going on. I don't know, but I think that there might have been some players on the state level that wanted to do things that really would have contradicted individual rights.
Maybe that would have evaded the Civil War.
Maybe. I mean, that's obviously a question that the founding fathers kicked the can down the road on that one. And maybe they had to, given the politics that they were dealing with at the time. I mean, I think Madison was a slave owner, I understand. So, they all believed, I think, that slavery would eventually be abolished, but they weren't ready to do it in their lifetime. They didn't quite know how to do it. And
then
yeah,
I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
Then you had Thomas Jefferson, who wanted the exact opposite of the null, something that Thomas Woods and those Austrian economists are always talking about, the nullification, where any state law, any federal law that the states don't like, they can get rid of. So it's interesting how they both had those two different perspectives.
Well, I mean, in the broader picture, philosophically, the system of checks and balances is not just three branches of the federal government, but it's also the balance between the states and the federal government. And that state sovereignty was something that precedes the Constitution. I mean, it's a great value. We have to, in 1919, 1920, what was not 1919? 1912. The amendment that basically turned the Senate over to direct election was an abrogation of state sovereignty. The states before that had the right to elect and appoint their senators, and that the senators who would be selected by state legislatures represented the interests of the states, whereas the House represented the interests of the people. And that was done away with in the first year of the Wilson administration, which was a pivotal year in terms of changing the way we are governed, the way we govern ourselves. And that, I think, had a very bad effect, because now the Congress, now the Senate they don't represent the states, they represent the federal government itself. That's their focus. So,
hey, Charles, speaking of which, do you know off the top of your head when whoever had the most votes was president, whoever had the second most votes was vice president? When did they change that?
I think they changed that in 1800 after the election. I think there's some very interesting things. I'm not a student of that, but I know that Thomas Jefferson was a candidate for president, and he was also the vice president, which made him the president of the assembly, the one that just took place here on January 6th when it was stopped, where the electors were counted, and he actually declared himself as president. I mean, he said, I'm not going to recognize this delegation, and which would have made Aaron Burr president. And I think that while he was a great president, nevertheless, I think that led to some changes in the Constitution, which said that, the president and vice president would have to run as a slate, and you wouldn't have the opposition become, the candidate.
Interesting. Yeah, because if you think of it, if it was still that way, Trump would be vice president right now, which seems a lot more democratic.
Well, I mean, I actually had a guy on the show, a while ago, I forget his name, but he wrote a book basically calling for this. He was like, we should have a proportional election where the person who comes in second is going to be both vice president, and then they'll share the presidency, almost a co-presidency. So I remember at the time, I'm like, oh, okay. So then you wanted Barack Obama to share the presidency with Mitt Romney or with John McCain, or you want to have, Clinton have to share, and he kind of backed away from it. It's like, that doesn't work. I don't think that's a good idea.
Charles, when you went to high school, did they teach civics?
Yeah, they did. And I something, I don't think that they are now. I don't think
they're not.
You can't find a copy of the U.S. Constitution in a high school. You cannot find it in a civics class. I've always suggested to anyone who's listening that anyone can pick up the U.S. Constitution. A high school kid could read it and understand it. It's not written in the kind of totalitarian language that we're used to from legal papers, where they fill it with a lot of jargon. It's simple, it's direct, you can read it and you can get it. It's not that hard. I also recommend that people take the time to read the inaugural address of President Trump. It is a very important document. It's a document, especially now, that we ought to read, because we need to understand before they try to destroy it and drop it down the memory hole. We need to understand what his philosophy was and what his presidency accomplished. This is I just published a book called We Are All Socialists Now. It's a quick read. I think it's still free, by the way, on Amazon. And I put that in the appendix, and I did a chapter on that. But mainly, the book is about the voter fraud.
I'm looking forward to your Satan book. I own your God book.
Thank you.
When is that coming out? Your book on Satan.
My book on Satan is. I'm just getting back to it. I took a break from it to write that quick book about the election. Right now, I'm taking another quick break from it to write a quick book about how we're moving into a Nazi period, a soft Nazi period. But so I don't know. I mean, I'll have that one's that's a tough one. I'm finding that to be emotionally draining to write that book. It's it's such a
I bet it is.
Yeah, but I'll get to it. I'll get it out. I mean, I have to really put my mind to that one. Anyway,
just as a tip, Charles, the way I look at it, and I told this to David, was anything that people do that serves God is God, and anything that people do to rule man or try to control man is Satan. And if you're looking at the Ten Commandments minimally, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. I mean, you just go from there. I mean, at least I'm a Catholic, so that's the Catholic perspective. Yeah. Which I think is also the Judeo-Christian value.
Yeah, and the Jewish perspective, I would point out. It emanates from the laws of Moses, which and the central theme of that are the Ten Commandments. So yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Paul. Have a good one.
God bless you.
Same to you. All right, and you're welcome to join the program. We're doing a live program here. 617-396-4958. What is on your mind this Friday? I'm doing an open line segment here. I've got guests lined up for next week, and I am determined to do the program Monday through Friday, 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, live on all of the subscribing live streams, and that's a growing number. And I'm archiving it on all of the subscribing archives, which is also a growing number. I'm trying to expand the various venues so that if any one of them is taken out, then hopefully the other ones won't be. I suppose I could put a plug on the whole thing. I don't know. But anyway, you're welcome to join the program. If you are going to call in, please do it now, because what's been going on is that I will wrap up the show at maybe a little after 1 o'clock. And then once I've sort of closed up shop, all of a sudden calls start coming in and it's too late. So if you are thinking about calling, please do it now. 617-396-4958. That number again is 617-396-4958. I'm going to have to look into that historian that Paul mentioned. That's interesting to me. I've got a book coming in from Anton Chatkin he's a pretty controversial historian, I will admit. And I take anyone with a little grain of salt, but I like his stuff. He tends to look at the difference between American nationalism and what he suggests is the internationalist, globalist, Wall Street, City of London, axis that is interested in unfettered free trade and informal world order. And so on that one, I'm kind of in sync with him, although there are some other areas I'm not so sure about. I know, I think he had an association for a while with Lyndon LaRouche, who I look at with suspicion. He had been a former communist. I don't know. I just don't trust that. But he's a good writer. He wrote a book called Treason in America, which I liked. So I'm looking forward to reading that. And I've got other things. I'm reading Jay Dyer's book, which is about occult Hollywood. Very interesting. He does movie analysis of the occultic symbols that are fixated into Hollywood movies and what that means. That's very interesting to me. I enjoyed having on David Whitehead yesterday, whose program Truth Warriors gets into a good kind of look at the deep state and its connections. I don't agree with everything he had to say, and I don't understand some of it, But in the interest of the free and open exchange of ideas, I think he's an honest and sincere presenter of his points of view, and they are important views. I mean, it's going only can lead to greater thinking, greater enlightenment, and for that, I support that. Um, anyway, to go back to my discussion on the issue today. So you have the upcoming conviction of President Trump. You've got threats that are being issued by the Democratic Party shock troops, the Antifa BLM, against the lives and the safety of senators who may vote against it. This threat was issued by Michael Moore, who is an influential insider, movie documentarian. He's big in Hollywood. He's big in the Democratic establishment. He's one of these sort of what we now call influencers. And he just gave an interview where he said just this. He said, any of these people who are not going to convict Trump, they're going to be in big, big trouble. And, we're going to go after them. And it was very threatening, frankly. And I think that, again, we had the shock troops, which is what Lenin called the Cheka, his private army. That's what these people are, essentially, the Antifa BLM. Do terror last summer by looting Black businesses, burning Black neighborhoods, and killing Black people across the country. And they did so as a way to create the sort of social disorder that terrorism does, because they felt it would help defeat Trump. When Trump tried to call out the National Guard in Portland, Oregon, he was attacked for that, so he backed away. When he tried to call out symbolically the attempt by these thugs in Washington, D.C. to start looting monuments, I mean, they were on their way to the Jefferson Memorial. They had, they had the Andrew Jackson statue in a noose in front of the White House, and they had firebombed St. John's Church, which is a church that every American president from Madison to today, with the exception of Kennedy, because he was Catholic, had worshiped at. I mean, this is an important historic institution, a spiritual institution, that it had been firebombed. And President Trump went out to show a personal show of force by standing in front of it and holding up a Bible, which I thought was a great and inspiring thing to do. And instead, not only was he attacked by the usual suspects in the media who held this up as something that we ought to ridicule for some reason without explaining why, but that people in the military, including the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I think, that being Mark Milley, made what I would describe as seditious comments, that they would not support President Trump if he called out the army to quell the rebellion. To me, that's insubordination. They should have been fired for that. That's why General Douglas MacArthur was fired by Truman, and rightfully. General MacArthur was a great man. He led the American forces in the Pacific Theater. I mean, this is one of the greatest military geniuses of all time. He masterminded the Incheon landing in Korea, which is viewed by military historians as the greatest single military maneuver in history. It was excuse me. It was a coordinated land, sea, and air operation that drove the North Koreans out of South Korea very quickly. But he was insubordinate to the commander-in-chief, that being the president of the United States, Harry Truman, and Harry Truman fired him, and he should have. So, I mean, Trump couldn't do that, though, because the enemies that were arrayed against him were too powerful. It could have led to a coup d'etat. So he backed down. And as a result, the shock troops are still there. I believe that it is those same shock troops, and I stand by this, that were at least partially, if not more than wholly, involved in the incursion in the U.S. Capitol building. We've already identified several of them, including this guy, Mark Sullivan, who was an Antifa guy or BLM guy, and who was seen at their events leading the charge into the Capitol. We know that this was a setup for several reasons, and it was a successful one on their part because they have the whole media behind them. To first of all, stop the hearings, which they did. I got into this already. I will reiterate quickly. Excuse me. 7 of the states were contested, including New Mexico, which Biden had actually won. There was serious allegations brought that these elections had been stolen. There were alternative delegates that had been elected to replace the ones that had been appointed by the state governors, and that the Constitution essentially allows for these contested states to have a hearing at the time that the electors are counted, and that hearing can take up to 2 hours. There was expectation that this would expose finally the nature of the fraud. It had not been done by the media. It had not been done by the states. It had not been done by the judiciary, the so-called independent judiciary on the state or federal level. So there was a sense that at last, the final arbiter, the Congress, the Hall of the People, would hear the evidence. And that's exactly what was happening. Now, as a sidebar, there was a political theory, excuse me, which held, that Vice President Pence as acting as the president of the assembly, could simply choose not to recognize the delegation, which would have essentially thrown the whole thing into the Congress, because then neither side would have achieved enough electors. And then there would have been a special session of the Congress. Each state would have sent up one delegate. Those delegates would have been appointed by the legislatures. And given the fact that there are 31 legislators controlled by Republicans, that would have meant that Donald Trump would have won the election. But Vice President Pence chose not to do that. Now, that is, I understand, what was done by Thomas Jefferson. I was just talking about that with Paul, that Jefferson basically, refused to recognize a delegation, which made him president. Pretty corrupt, but, he was a great president either way. But Pence chose not to do this. I don't really hold that against him. I think that was very, a legal theory that could have gone either way, and Pence chose not to do it. I don't think that that's not, to me, that's fine. However, the Constitution was clear that if a delegation was contested by at least one senator and one House member in writing, then there would be a hearing, and that's how it had always happened. That's how it happened when Bush won. I think there was a contestation of the state of Ohio that was brought by Senator Barbara Boxer, and there was a hearing. That's how it happens. And so those of us who finally wanted to hear the evidence one way or the other were expecting 7 hearings because there were 7 states to be contested. And in that capacity, we expected these hearings and the process to stretch on possibly for several days, and that the states were to be called in alphabetical order. The first state that was contested was Arizona, and apparently in Arizona, they're still suing. There's a huge amount of corruption in that state. I think it's pretty easy to prove that that state had a stolen election based upon what I've been reading from their own state legislators. And Arizona started to present the evidence. I watched some of it on TV. I was actually doing this broadcast at the time, so I couldn't watch the whole thing, but I watched them begin to roll it out, and it was stunning. and it was shocking, and it was great, and it was amazing. And then all of a sudden, I went back to doing some talk, and I turned back the TV, and all I could see were people battering the doors down at the U.S. Capitol, and I saw police with water hoses that reminded me of Selma, Alabama. Putting that aside, the fact is that once the evidence was rolled out and once they started to present it, everything came to a stop. How convenient was that? We never got to hear the evidence because the whole thing was suspended because a couple of people dressed in Halloween costumes came in. I'm not apologizing for this. There was people who died, who were shot dead. Okay. I would suggest that this was an Antifa BLM participating thing, at least. I think that the Trump people also went in. I think they followed them in. And so the whole thing was suspended, and it didn't reconvene until like 1 o'clock in the morning when everyone was asleep. The country wasn't paying any attention. And then they just gavelled Biden through. There was no hearing. In a way, the same thing happened on election night. In the wee hours of the morning, 5-6 states stopped counting. Then they suddenly recounted again, and all of a sudden you had Biden getting these strange drops. But I'm not going to relitigate that. That would have all been evidence that could have been debated at these hearings, and we didn't get that debate. So the Capitol incursion served two purposes. It served to stop the debate and confirm Biden. It was the culmination. It was the cherry on the top of the sundae in terms of the whole operation. And secondly, it was then used to turn the attention onto not only President Trump, but on all of us, that all of a sudden we're now seen as leading an insurrection. We're insurrectionists, we're terrorists. And, for that reason, as I've said, it reminds me of the Reichstag fire. The Reichstag fire was used as an excuse by the new Nazi regime to suspend the Constitution and start rounding people up and taking emergency measures. Now, I'm not saying it's that bad, but it could get that bad. It's not that far from it. I stand by that. I'm concerned. And so on the surface, they are now finishing it off by trying to finish President Trump off, by trying to have his head on the silver platter. They want to impeach him, and they're going to impeach him probably. And there's going to be a trial in 2 weeks to push this lie that he was involved with an insurrection. He was responsible for this. It's going to be an attack not only on him, and by the way, Schumer has openly said it's going to be a resolution to ensure that he never runs again, so he won't be able to come back. That's what they're afraid of. But it's an attack on all of us. It's basically saying we're all guilty of this, which is a lie. And so that's why, in a nutshell, and I'm going to wrap things up at this point because it's a little after the hour. That is why I am contending that we are entering into a time of soft Nazism. We have collusion between a federal government that had been, I would suggest, wrongfully installed into power, and various corporations which help them do that, and which are using monopolistic powers to enrich themselves, advance their power, and suppress their opponents. That's what Nazism is. It is a partnership between government and certain members of the private sector. Now, I'm not saying that the Biden administration is doing this formally, but they're doing it in the de facto sense. They're doing it by turning a blind eye to the censorship, by turning a blind eye to the fact that the Nazi street thugs are being promoted by their friends in the media who are part of this collusion, and that the overall effect is a suppression of free speech and a suppression of personal liberty. So I shall be watching this to the best of my ability this year. I hope that other people do it as well. I want to mention that my TikTok has now been restored. And so I'm probably going to do a live TikTok later today. Check it out. Please subscribe to my station on YouTube. It helps me to get subscribers. I've noticed that some people are being taken off my station at YouTube. So to counter that, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe to Charles Moscowitz Live on YouTube. And my books are available at Amazon Books, right? I mean, particularly my latest book, which is a quick read. I think there's still some there that are free. I'm not sure, but I believe there are. And that is, it's quick. You could read it in one sitting. It's very short. We Are All Socialists Now, a deplorable looks at the 2020 election. So on that note, I want to thank you all for watching. I want to bless this country. I want to bless our president, and it is Biden, because he is the president, and I bless our system, not because I like him, but because I'm grateful that we've had, a transition of power into a new administration. Whatever that is, we have it. We didn't have a civil war. We don't have a revolution in the literal sense. I'm nonviolent. I'd never advocate any violence. I'm not a pacifist, but I mean, I believe in the nonviolent movement of the late great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that we should have nonviolent resistance. So I bless this country. I bless this administration. I bless you. And I hope God blesses America. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody.